All right, y'all. This is Lenny Yesner from the Bard High School Early College Queens College Transfer Office coming to you live, or not live if you're watching this video after. So learn about how to use something called the College Scorecard, which is put out by the U.S. Department of Education to compare colleges. So there's two ways you can use this. One, like as a younger student to compare schools while you're doing research. And two, as a deciding student, sort of in their last year, when you're deciding between like two schools and not sure which one to go, in addition to visiting and you wanted to see data. So I'll show you how to use it. So here we are at the College Scorecard, and I'm going to see if I can do like a little pen. I'm going to try this. I haven't done this one. Oh no, it doesn't work. I'm not going to use the pen. So I'm going to say that you're going to go to collegescorecard.ed.gov, right? So here we are on the page, all these smiling, happy graduates. There's some interesting information about paying for college here, which can be helpful. But we're going to start, so if you were going to do research on schools, you would go to like programs and degrees and search by things or search by location. But we're going to do the search by name tab. And we're going to compare 3 schools that are just here in New York City because, you know, why not? All right, so 3 schools that are here in New York City. We're going to do Hunter. Right. So I'm going to hit find. Oh, there we go. So Hunter, and I'm going to star it, and it's going to show up in my comparison chart. And I've already added 3 other schools. So I've gone to edit search and added 3 other schools. So I've got Columbia, NYU, Stony Brook, and Hunter here. So let's look at just Hunter alone and see what it looks like on its own. So we've got a map. We've got this stuff here. What kind of is a 4-year public city large school? It says an Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institution and a Hispanic serving institution. That means they serve a certain percentage of students that identify as those categories. So they've got annual costs, and so it's pretty low, and it shows that it's sort of in relation to the average, right? Graduation rate is 53%. So that's calculated. You can say information. You can say, okay, the graduation rate within 150% of the expected time of completion. So that's typically 6 years for schools that award predominantly 4-year degrees. So these rates are only for full-time students. So 53% of students at Hunter graduate in at least 6 years, in less than 6 years. National average is actually 47, so they're a little bit above average, even though it doesn't still seem that good, right? Like, what's happening to all these people that aren't graduating in 6 years? That's real talk. Salary after attending. So median earnings of former students who receive federal financial aid at 10 years after entering the school. So we don't have data on students who don't receive federal financial aid, like students who just paid out of pocket, which could be higher, right? We know that students who are receiving financial aid may not become from as wealthy families, and sometimes that correlates to how much money you make afterwards. But we see here it's $47,200. So take that with a grain of salt. We also have costs broken down by family income, financial aid and debt. So 12% of students at Hunter receive some sort of federal student loans. Typical total debt after graduation is $11,599, and the typical monthly loan payment is $123. Graduation and retention. So this is important. That the 53% graduation rate, and then retention. That's did they go the first year and then come back? And that shows the strength of the program and whether or not they were able to continue. Earnings after school is again the salary after attending. Student body. So the number of undergraduate students. This is talking about how many are full-time and how many are part-time. Socioeconomic diversity. So that's a really important number to pay attention to, right? You know, we at BSEC are a pretty socioeconomically diverse group. We've got a lot of students on free or reduced lunch, which is a form of federal aid. And so you want to look at the socioeconomic diversity of the schools you're looking at. So 44% of students received a Pell Grant, which is intended for low-income students. So almost 1 out of 2 students received a Pell Grant. That's who's going to be in your classes. So race and ethnicity, 30% Hispanic or Latinx, 27% Asian, 25% white, and 10% Black. 6% non-resident aliens or international or undocumented students, depending on how you want to look at that figure. 2% just said that there were 2 or more races. You see the numbers for Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, and American Indian are incredibly low, and those pan out actually at most schools across the country. You want to look at SAT, ACT scores. You might look at that as like a student who's researching schools and academic programs, right? You can see the most popular programs. So psychology, 25% of students at Hunter study psych, right? Then the social sciences, then the health professions related programs. It's interesting because in Hunter, everybody's like, oh, everybody studies the sciences. Well, actually, 25% study psychology. So it's a pretty big program. All right, so that's one school, right? But let's go back to the search results and let's look at what it means to compare schools across each other. Boom, this is my favorite. So this is for particularly, this could be for anyone who's doing research on schools. So we've got this average annual cost, right? So we've got Columbia, Hunter, NYU, and Stony Brook. So Columbia costs $22,000 per year is the annual average cost. Now that's way below what the price tag is, which is about $75, right? Hunter costs $7, way cheaper. You're not going to get cheaper than that. NYU is $37, and Stony Brook is $13, right? Graduation rates. Now, Columbia's graduation rate is off the charts. It's 95%. 95% of people who go into Columbia graduate in at least 6 years. That's a very high graduation rate. Hunter, 53%, right? Like I said, it's a little bit above the national average. NYU, 84%, right? And then Stony Brook, 70%. So now let's look at salary after attending. And I wanted to say here, sometimes people think graduation rate, like if the graduation rate is lower, it means the school is more difficult or more challenging, and so that's why people aren't graduating. And in my experience, that is absolutely not the case. What it means is that Columbia is a very difficult, rigorous place. What it means is that Columbia has the resources to really support students to graduate, and maybe they're also taking students that are already better set up to graduate in the first place, right? So the pipeline of who's going. Hunter has a wider net, right? They're really taking students a lot of students who are Pell eligible, and we'll see the difference in a minute. Some students who are low income, and those students often have a lot going on in their lives. Sometimes they have to take a break from school because their mom is sick, or they don't have like a trust fund to come and take care of it if they need to work. So that look at the graduation rates, but think about also the demographics of the students who are there in relationship to those graduation rates. The salary after attending. People, don't really think about this, but it's really important. Salary after attending Columbia is $83,300. So let's look at this. This is not right after. This is not right after. This is 10 years after. Oh, come on, click on this. Come on. So the median earnings of former students who receive federal financial aid at 10 years after entering the school. So this is like 6 years after graduation, right? Is $83,000. For Hunter, it's $47,000. NYU $61,900, and Stony Brook $57,600. So NYU is way more expensive than Stony Brook, but the median salary is not that different, All right, so college information. So now we've got most of the students at Columbia are full-time students, meaning their only job is going to school, right? Or not the only job, but that's the main focus. Hunter, some students are part-time. NYU, mostly full-time. Stony Brook, still full-time. It compares in terms of these are all. The differences between these schools are their undergraduate size. So Columbia is the smallest, right? NYU is actually the biggest, which we might not realize that NYU is the biggest here. And they are all in the city. Some are public and some are private, when that just has to do with where their funding comes from. Socioeconomic diversity. Now, this is super interesting, right? So percentage of students that received an income-based federal Pell Grant intended for low-income students. So that's a grant the federal government gives out. So max is about $6,000 or $6,200, and it's for families that are low income, right? Not all families qualify for this, but a lot of families do. Only 22% of Columbia students are Pell eligible. So that doesn't include the whole Pell. It might be, even Pell students who are eligible for even $500 of Pell will be considered Pell eligible, right? It doesn't have to be the full Pell. Hunter is 44%. That's a lot, right? NYU is 21%, and Stony Brook is 33%. So you want to think about, at Columbia and NYU, 2 out of 10 people are eligible for a low-income grant. So the other students are much more, have many more financial resources. How does that impact the classroom? If 44% of students are Pell eligible, what is it? how is that going to shift who's in the classroom and who gets to be in the classroom and who doesn't, right? So things to think about and what's important to you, particularly thinking about your own background, right? If you're a Pell eligible student, is it important to be around other students who come from a similar background, or do you not want that, right? Like what is the back and forth there? If you are not a Pell eligible student, what would it mean to be around maybe a lot of other students who are really more privileged, versus what would you learn from being around students who have different backgrounds from you, right? So race and ethnicity. So make sure to look at, different backgrounds, right? So if we start with Asian identified students. So Columbia, 18%, Hunter, 27%, NYU. These are all fairly similar, right? The lowest at Columbia. Black students, right? Much lower, right? So what's that about, right? What if you're a Black student, you want to think about what it might feel like to be at one of these institutions and have only 7% of the school be Black identified. However, there's also probably a very strong community there, while not very big, very strong and really connected, because they have to be, right? So you're going to find really powerful social networks. Hispanic. So CUNY Hunter, as we said, is a designated a Hispanic serving institution, meaning they serve over a certain percentage, and so 30% is absolutely the highest. We can say, and then we think about white students, right? So 37% of Columbia students are white, and that also includes doesn't include a whole lot of international students, right? So thinking about how that contributes to diversity on campus as well. Costs. Okay, so $22,000 for Columbia. We already talked about this. NYU is the most expensive for sure. By family category, right? Also looking at that. Financial aid and debt. So percentage of students paying down their debt. So what this means is, are students able to successfully pay their debt without going into default, which means they're not paying their debt and they're in some financial trouble. Ooh. So we want that number to be pretty high. We want the percentage of students paying down their debt to be quite high. So, interestingly enough, NYU, Columbia, and Stony Brook are all similar, and Hunter's low. We also know not a lot of students take out debt at Hunter. So, total debt after graduation. Columbia, $21,406, Hunter, $11,599, NYU, $22,900. They've done a lot of work on this number in the last 5 years. So it used to be much higher. And Stony Brook is $18,000. Students receiving federal loans. Typical monthly payment, right? And I'm going to talk about loan payment in another video, but this is something to look at. Graduation retention, right? We looked at this stuff. Retention rate is obviously highest at Columbia, but it's pretty similar at these other schools. And earnings after school, we also looked at. So take all of these things into account when you're deciding which school to go to, in addition to visiting, and talk to your CTO advisor, because we can help you make decisions. We can also put you in touch with real life alumni that go beyond this data. But this is a tool that is helpful. So collegescorecard.ed.gov, check it out.